Hi, this is Ruby, and I'm giving my presentation on Justice, Gender, and the Family by Susan Moller Okin. This text was published formally in 1989, which was just right after Rawls's text was published, so they're very much in conversation with each other. Women are paid less and do more work at home, especially domestic care and taking care of kids. And this is a self perpetuating cycle where the male partner's work is more valuable financially, so it's given greater priority, thus shunning women off into the domestic sphere. There's nothing inherent about the workplace that makes changing impossible beside our own mindset. Gender is defined as, quote, the deeply entrenched institutionalization of sexual difference. Contemporary feminism is fighting against this biological determinism, and yet legislation is imposing and confining women is still made in the contemporary moment, both when this text was published and also today. Contemporary social theorists have ignored feminism and justice in the context of gender. Just look at the use of pronouns in different theorists' work. The goal of this book, however, is to address gender as other social theorists had failed to do so, by asking the question, quote, how just is gender, and then trying to address all of that subsequent injustice. Social theorists created a distinction between the, quote, private domestic life and the, quote, public life, noting that they exist in accordance with different principles and rules. Part of why men are able to transition between these public and private spheres so easily is precisely because women cannot. Men depend on women to be stuck in the private sphere in order to give them agency. Although there is a move away from gendered language such as mankind, he, and men, moving into gender-neutral language doesn't necessarily mean that our thoughts or ideas are also neutral. Quote, ignoring the irreducible biological differences between the sexes, end quote, and their differently assigned social roles does nothing to challenge the existing sexist systems that use them. Okin identifies three main reasons why the current state of affairs in social theory is unacceptable. First is that women must be included in a narrative about justice for it to be just. Second, equality of opportunity is undermined by sexism. And third is that the family must be just in order to have a just society. Women must be included in the larger narrative of justice in order for it to be just. Women coded in domestic and private spheres must be included in social theory and not relegated to a non-existent space not governed by the same principles of justice and equality. Equal opportunity doesn't exist because there are so many different home configurations, and not everyone will ever have guaranteed access to happy, loving, and alive parents for the duration of their childhood. Inequalities in gender lead to direct and real harm to children daily. Thus, increasing equality for women increases the opportunity of their children. The family as an institution is also necessary to teach children about justice in practice. The family is the first place where people develop the capacity for empathy as children, which both Rawls and Okin denote as being integral to the understanding of justice as a whole. Although Rawls's principles, when applied to gendered situations, would alleviate the issues of gender-based inequality, he does not set out to address it in any intentional way. It's more of an incidental happenstance. Okin then brings up the question, can justice ever coexist with gender, or is gender as a construct unjust? A feminist reader of Rawls' text keeps asking, does this theory of justice apply to women? Rawls only thinks about fathers in the terms of being heads of the household, and largely ignores the issues of family throughout the rest of his theory. Although his theory does affect women, it does so incidentally rather than intentionally. Rawls never asks if the monogamous family is a social institution, but the people in the original position are heads of house, and thus cannot decide what is just in the family because they're in a position of power and not mutually disinterested. In order to alleviate this, Rawls needs to include the family as a social institution, not something separate to it. Okin notes that Rawls assumes that families are just. He also notes that just parents aren't necessarily play a big role in the creation of just children, because of the amount of time and proximity that they spend together. Empathy and feelings also play a really important role in justice in Rawls, unlike other social theorists like Kant. If the veil of ignorance also applies to sex and gender, then it will necessarily restructure these gendered systems. Gender in Rawls' society cannot form a legitimate part of the social structure because it interferes with the fair equality of opportunity. Thus, we need to abolish gender for his idea of political justice to function, and for there to be social and economic equality between men and women. The family needs to be a just institution, even though other theorists, unlike Okin, seem to ignore it. So, how do we do it? Okin wants there to be no meaning to sex and gender. She wants it to become something small, like eye color or height. This book is not just about theory, but also structural implementation. How can it happen? Okin suggests that there should be no social differentiation of the sexes, socially, economically, or politically, especially when it comes to the domestic or household sphere. Okin suggests that men and women should have equal responsibility in raising their kids and rearing them. She also outlines several policy suggestions from taking this from an ideological to a practical space. 1. Pregnancy should be seen as a temporary disability, and childbirth and child rearing should be ideologically separate concepts. 2. Schools should be structured so that men and women are equally in positions of power. 3. Schools should teach about inequalities and privilege. And 4. Greater male involvement in child rearing. Gender-structured marriage is currently a necessity and a desired institution from an individual standpoint, but it's a problem. We need a legal structure to regulate it when there are children involved so that they don't learn about a bad distribution of labor. And Okin also suggests that men and women should have legal entitlement to the money coming into their household equally. In summation, families are where we learn about both gender and justice. Okin talks about how to make families just, and she suggests that people should co-parent with equal responsibilities, also noting that justice requires a sense of empathy developed in the house. And finally, this is not merely an aspirational political text, but a literal guideline for change.